And now it's time for me to introduce our first distinguished speakers of our fourth talk today. And he is a gentleman sitting next to me. He is Professor Ravindra Goonetilleke. Professor Goonetilleke has been in the field of human-centered design for over 35 years. Innovative design and product development are his research interests. Professor Goonetilleke is a professor of the Division of Integrative Systems and Design and the Department of Industrial Engineering and Decision Analytics at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Prior to HKUST, he was the Human Factors Manager at the Nike Sport Research Lab in Beaverton, Oregon. And before that, he was a senior ergonomist at the Biomechanics Corporation of America in Long Island, New York. Professor Goonetilleke has offered his consultation services to many companies in the States and definitely also in Hong Kong. He holds over 150, well, that's a lot, referred publications in journals and conference proceedings, owns 8 U.S. patents, and he's also the editor of the book Science of Footwear, published by the CRC Press. But before I pass the time to Professor Goonetilleke, I would like to invite everyone, if you have any questions when a professor is presenting that you would like to direct to professor afterwards, do remember to drop your questions in our chat box. And if coincidentally your question has already appeared in the chat box, simply press the phone button next to the questions, as our system will rank the question according to its popularity. So remember, drop your questions there and we will answer the questions after the sharing section. Well, I think it's now time. I can see Professor is ready for the sharing and everyone's ready to. So ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for me to pass the time and the stage to Professor Ravindra Goonetilleke. Professor, please.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Kinsey. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me as well. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk to you about what I've done in the past and also what I'm doing right now. So my talk is basically centered around defining the right problem in order to delight the user. That's basically what I'm going to talk about. Now, I think you got a brief introduction from Vinci about who I am. I consider myself a balanced academic because we have academics, who are mainly theoretical, but have very little understanding of what really happens in industry. I've been in the industry for a long time, just before joining the academics. So I can give you different perspectives from the different angles that I've been in. So here are some of the companies that I worked for. Also, I have done a lot of consulting as well for many US companies. This is just a sample of what I've done. But I don't think you are here to listen to what I've done. I think it's beyond that. And I want to talk to you about more interesting stuff than that. So these days, I think this is a fantastic time to be involved in innovation. When I first started working after my graduation, we had to write software using raw programming languages. And then if we wanted to make a prototype, what we had to do was go to a manufacturer, give them the spec, and then they would make a mold and they would do a prototype. And the prototype comes out, and then what happens is that the prototype is not what you expected. You got to make a change, which means you got to make another mold and make another prototype. This becomes very expensive. As time goes on, if you have many changes to make, it becomes more and more expensive. Now, let's say, okay, finally you got the product out. You need to find the network in order to sell your product. But today, that is not the case. We have open source software. We have 3D printing, where you can produce a prototype very quickly. We have crowdfunding platforms, where you can raise money. And also, once you have that, you can easily market this on the different platforms that are available. So this is one of the best times to be doing product development, innovation, and go for it. Okay, this is my main theme here, to tell you what you really should be doing in order to get there. Now, what happens most of the time is that, especially when we have engineers, I myself am an engineer, what happens is that we tend to have ideas, and then we start developing that idea into a prototype, and then we start testing it, right? And then at that point in time, you think of, okay, who's gonna be wanting this product? Why do I need this product? It's a little bit too late for that. Okay, this is where the designer comes in. If you look at my slide here, you'll see a very small diamond in front, but that should not be the case. But this is how engineers work. They go with the idea, prototype, and test. That's not what you should be doing. So think about, if you were to go fishing, you are in a boat, you're not just gonna, stop the boat somewhere and start fishing. That's not how we do it, okay? What we are gonna do is we are gonna explore the surface around before you can put your nets out and you start fishing. That's exactly what you should be doing when you are doing innovation as well. You need to explore the surface. And that is basically the top of the T that I have. And this is where the designer comes into play. They are going to explore the various things that are possible before you start digging deep. The vertical bar of that T is basically digging deep, and that's where you're going to need the engineer. So we need the designer, we need the engineer. This is not a timeout, okay? But that's basically how it goes. Now, you're going to say, all right, if you have this, is it going to work, okay? If you read any of Edward de Bono's work, you'll know this is what he calls lateral thinking and vertical thinking. So lateral thinking refers to the horizontal bar of the T. The vertical thinking refers to the vertical bar of that T. So I won't go through the whole list, but essentially, when you look at this horizontal bar, you are making a lot of jumps from one place to another. Whereas in the vertical bar, you got to be right in each step. Okay, that's what engineers are very good at. If there is any problem at any step, they're going to say, no, stop. Okay, this doesn't make sense. This is one of the primary reasons that designers cannot work with engineers, because designers think one way, engineers think another way. Okay, there's no match. I work with designers. I've been a designer. I've been an engineer, right? I understand that. The mental model of these two groups of people are very different. How do you bring them together? That's the important question that you really need to answer, okay? That's where let the designer do their work in that horizontal part and let the engineer come into play, okay, to develop that vertical end. That's how it should go. Now, what does that mean? To me, the most important part is defining and refining the problem. Okay, that's the reason now that small diamond that you saw before is really enlarged, because this is one of the most important things. As you saw, the title of my talk is Define the Right Problem, right? So how do you define the right problem? Which means you're going to have to talk to a lot of people, understand what the problem is. It's not just a case of defining the problem. You need to refine the problem in order to know what to do. And then at that point in time, you go ideate, prototype, and test. Now comes the issue. So if I have all these steps, this is a traditional design thinking process, which we call the design thinking process. Now, what really happens? If you have this empathy that you need to have towards the users, you define the problem, you refined it, you ideated, you prototyped and tested. Does that mean you have a great product? Do you have a wow product? Okay. It's not necessarily so. This is why people do go through this design thinking process, have a product, they test it, and they check the user experience at that point in time. Isn't it a little bit too late to check user experience at that point in time? User experience should be designed into the product. So where does user experience come into play? In these 5 steps, there is no user experience anywhere. So this is the most important thing. It's not just making a physical product. It's not, taking care of the errors. Today, when you develop a product, what you need is it's got to have fun, it's got to be comfortable, and it's got to have that emotion, the effect. These are some of the primary things that you really need to have. If you don't have that, you don't have a wow product. How do you get that in? Okay, this is the biggest thing that we really need to answer. How do we do it? Once you refine that problem, you need to understand what people really do. What do people sense? What do people perceive? What goes into, using that product? How do they use it? That's what you need to be doing before you start ideating, which means you have to understand the psychology of people, which is really missing in a lot of this design thinking process. And that's where you build in the user experience part. If you have that right, the user experience is automatically going to be in that product. But if you don't think about that, you're going to be doing this incremental loop to increase the user experience. So what I'm going to be talking about is mainly about this part here, which a lot of people have been ignoring in the past and lately as well, because people are now focused on the design thinking process rather than the person itself. So we have what is called design for X. Many of you, I'm sure, know what the X stands for. There's a whole range of things that I've given here. It can be for manufacture, it can be for assembly, it can be for service, can be for sustainability. But one of the primary things that's missing is where's that X that stands for people? Where's design for people? Where is that? That's not there. That's what you need to have. So it's not sufficient to get the needs of people and bring a product into market. That's not enough. Okay, you need to understand the perception part as well. This plays a very, very important role. So here's the human information processing loop, which is the central part. After you refine the problem, before you start ideating, you need to understand this, which is what? Sensing, perceiving, bringing in, once you perceive something, you're going to recall some past experiences. And based on those past experiences, you're going to make some selection as to what you should be doing, and you'll take some action. This action goes into the product or the system, and this loop goes on. Okay. These 4 blocks or 5 or 6 blocks that I have, okay, are the most important things that you really need to be focusing on. So I am going to be focusing on 3 of these blocks. I cannot focus on all of them because of time limitations. I'm going to talk about the sensing part, the perception part, and also some of the memory aspects as well. So I'm going to use 2 examples. One of the, both of these examples are things that, you have experienced yourself. I'm pretty sure you know them. One of them is shoes, and the other ones are seats. Think about what we do. Okay, most of the time, other than 1/3 of your lifetime where you'll be sleeping, the rest of the time you're either sitting down or standing on your shoes. Okay, you may be barefooted, of course. So the first example that I'm going to use is a footwear example, a shoe. Now, what do shoe companies do? They look at the materials that they should be using. They look at the design parts, meaning the styling. These are some of the important things that they pay attention to. Now, I've studied shoes for a very long time. I know exactly what material you need to have, or rather, what characteristics you need to bring into those shoes. So what we've done is we found these characteristics which people perceive, and those characteristics are going to be very similar to a spring characteristic. And that's one of the reasons that Nike came out with the shocks. The shocks basically have similar characteristics as a spring. But that's not all. There's more than that. Okay, so this gives the cushioning aspects, but there's more to it, which is what's called the footbed, which is where the foot is sitting on inside the shoe. And that plays a very, very important part. Now, this particular company raised almost 300,000 euro on Kickstarter some time ago. And their main theme here was that you can easily change the heel part of the shoe so that you can make it a flat or you can make it a high heel. This is not going to work like that, because it's more than the heel. That footbed is going to play a very, very important role, and you need to have that shape depending on the heel height that you have. So if you have a very low heel height, there is a certain shape. We've done a lot of studies in order to understand how the foot behaves, how the foot moves when you have different heel heights. And we've done a lot of scanning, we've done a lot of casting, and based on that, we have patterns to understand and also develop this particular footbed. So here's a shoe that we developed with a custom footwear company in Germany. And the key point here is the footbed shape, which let me isolate that footbed shape. That's the shape that you have here. If you look at this, you're going to say, hey, what's in it? There's a lot in it. That shape is what's going to tell whether your foot is sitting right or not. Most of the shoes, especially when the ladies wear them, I call them see-through shoes, because if you look from a side, you can look the other side because there's a gaping hole right there. And that's not very good. It's not, your foot is not really supported well. So you need to understand these aspects, which is what people sense, what people perceive, and how people behave based on that. If you understand that, then you can go ahead and ideate, which means what? We need to know the parameters that are governing these high heel shoes. So here are some of them that I've shown you. We have a lot of mathematics. I'm not going to get into that, right? But there's a lot of science behind how you should develop a good shoe. This particular shoe is one that a lot of ladies have worn. They have worn these for 8 to 10 hours. And their comment is, this feels like a flat shoe. This feels like a sports shoe. Why? There are certain parameters that you need to understand about what people feel. And that is what brings that wow aspect. And this is what you really need to do. Bring in the wow aspect. But you need to understand the human side of it, designed for people. That's the center part that I was talking about. After you refine the problem, make sure you understand the human information processing related to that in order to ideate and develop your product. The second example that I want to talk to you about is seating. Again, this is something that I'm pretty sure you may have experienced, but in this case, this relates to car seating. This is a company that we worked with for a very long time, and some of my colleagues were doing a lot of testing for this particular company. I'll tell you what the company is later on. So what happened was the company used to ship seats, car seats to us, and then we would do the testing for them, measurements, and also the interface pressures. And then we would do real subject testing, where we call in participants, get their comfort ratings, and so on. With the pressure testing that we've done, we can correlate these. There was no AI at that point in time. All we had were very, very primitive mathematical tools. We developed very complex math models in order to do this. And here's an example of the interface pressure testing that we did. We had to develop our own pressure mat as well. And we realized that this was taking a little bit too long to do this, because things have to go back and forth between these companies. So what we decided to do was have air bladders built into the seats so that we can adjust the seats to get the right comfort that people required. So there were so many different areas that we had to cater. The air bladders, we had 17 of them, just like what you see on the slide, which cover the different parts of the body, so that depending on whether you're taking a turn, whether you're going on a straight road, these would adjust by itself depending on what level of comfort that you wanted. Now, keep in mind, here's another place that where these 17 aspects come into play. Imagine you had 17 controls to change. Would you change them? You know, most of the chairs that you sit on, whether it be in the office or whether it be at home, you would have about 5 controls. Some of them have maybe 1. And if you have 5 controls, how many of them do you really change? Maybe 1, maybe 2. That's it. And that may be just once or twice a day. Imagine you had 17 controls. This is where you need to understand how people behave, what people really do. So 17 controls is humanly impossible to change all the time, which means we need to go into some automatic system. Now, about 3 years ago, the Porsche Macan GT came up with these same 17 controls, but they were manual. But we went into automatic system, and that's a pattern that you see. And keep a note of that date. It's 1992. This was 1992. 2010, Adidas came up with an intelligent shoe using the same patent because the patent just expired. They couldn't launch it. It was going to be for the 2010 FIFA World Cup because At that time in South Africa, it was raining. As you know, water and electricity don't go together. So as a result, they abandoned this concept of the Adidas intelligent shoe. But it's the same thing that has been used. But the important thing here is that now it's almost 30 years later, the same company, Lear Seating Corporation, is going to bring up what's called an intelligent seat. This is exactly the technology that we had in 1992, and we gave it to them. They sold the patent to another company, and here they are bringing the same concept out 29 years later. This is what I say, sometimes what you do may be totally ahead of time. And you need to know exactly when to bring these concepts so that you're going to be successful in the market. But the important thing is that user experience, how you bring it up. And at this point in time, before I end this talk, I just want to give you a quote from Stan Lee. If you don't know Stan Lee, he is the co-creator of a lot of characters, Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk, X-Men, and so on. What he said is, if you have an idea that you genuinely think is good, don't let some idiot talk you out of it. Now, when he presented the concept of Spider-Man to his publisher, the publisher thought this was the stupidest idea that you can ever have, because people don't like spiders. And this is a teenager. Teenagers are supposed to be sidekicks, not the main characters. But he couldn't get rid of this idea. So what he did was he started a series of books. Books became very, very popular, and then the publisher wanted it. So here we go. Okay, sometimes something which is very negative, spiders, for example, can be made positive. So again, something for you to think about. Don't think that something which is negative is always negative. Be positive. You can change it to be positive. With that, and I want to reiterate what I said before, just defining, ideating, prototyping is not going to do your user experience. You need to think about what happens in the middle. That's the most important thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor, for your insightful and also inspiring sharing with us. And well, definitely after your presentation and sharing, it will be the Q&A section. And let me take a look. I received some questions from our audiences, and well, a few. And I think I'm gonna pick like 2 or 3 of them. The first question that they have in mind, well, quite a number of participants followed them. It's how do you? Okay. Actually, I remember what you said just now, like designers and engineers think other way. And for this question, they're asked, do you have any tips for them in combining design and technology together in their business? Like how to do like any better way in communication like that?
So basically, as I said before, it's basically a T. This is not a timeout. It's a T, which means you need to explore where you wanna do, what you wanna do, right? Now that's something that designers are very good at doing. So let them do that part. Okay, engineer comes into that, engineer's gonna mess it up because they're gonna be looking at their past experiences. They're gonna be, having a lot of negatives. They're like, we tried this, it didn't work. So why are we doing this again, right? But most of the time is because, timing may have been wrong. The way you did it may have been wrong. Or not at the right time. All these things really contribute. So let the designer do their job, okay, before you start digging deep. And that's the time that the engineers have to be brought in order to see how to do it. And the engineer is going to say, no, we cannot do that. Okay, we can do this, but not this. No, go find how to do it. This is basically what Steve Jobs did. Okay, he got his engineers to do what he wanted, not what they could do. And this is why a lot of people had a hard time there because, they were difficult to do. People always, I am very lazy, okay? People are generally lazy. They do things that they like to do. They are comfortable with. They're always in their comfort zone. So you need to bring them out of their comfort zone so that, they can do what really should be done. That's basically how you can get to this part.
Well, just interested to know, like when you said like let designers to do their work and start off with designers and then engineers or technicians to join afterwards. But like if every party is doing their work and sharing their expertise, how can they actually find a midpoint, like a sweet spot in the collaboration process?
So the way it goes is that this exploration to know what to really do is one of the most important things. If you are digging in the wrong place, you may get some incremental innovation. That's not what we want today. We want disruptive innovation today, which means you have to be at the right spot. Now, the right spot, the engineer training doesn't help you to generate that right spot, except for commercial product. If you're talking about consumer product, the designers have a much better handle on what to look for and how to explore. Again, this is a topic that I can talk for one day. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about this exploration process of how you're going to explore that surface in order to know where to dig deep. Okay, this is just like digging for oil, right? You need to know where to dig. You go explore, and then you start digging. Okay, that exploration process is not generally done by the engineers, and that's very similar.
Okay, so for the next question, it's because you have been in this industry, the human-centered design, for over 35 years, and they would like to know from your experience, like what will be the most common mistake that people will make when having like innovation or having two different aspects merging together into their business?
Can you clarify what you mean by two different aspects?
I think this, what that audience is asking, like, what's the most common mistake that it may happen when they want to add innovation into their business, or if in their business they have two very different aspects combining together?
All right, so I think this goes to the double diamond process that I showed you. So you saw there is one part which is understanding the users and also defining and refining the problem, and then the other diamond was basically the ideate, prototype, and test. Now the linking part is where the people come into play. That's the design for people part, and that's your linking part. So at that point in time, you are bringing these different views and then the person as well. So you will have psychologists coming into play. You will have human factors engineers. You'll have ergonomists. All these people have to join in order to create that link between these two aspects. Most of the time, that link is missing. And that's the reason that I brought this up, because that's a key part of user-centered design. Without that, there's no user experience.
Okay. So, but for the last question, I think this last question, it's not really specifically related to design and technology, but it's a more general one. Because some of the audience would like to know, what do you think, what's the challenges of developing business, especially in Hong Kong? Like, yeah, it's a general question. Well, you have consultancy expertise in States and in Hong Kong. I bet the business environment in States and Hong Kong, or all around the world, is very different. Especially in Hong Kong, what are the challenges in like starting business?
As far as starting business, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. More than challenges, I would say there's more opportunity relative to other countries around, because we have a manufacturing hub right across. This may not be the best time, but other than that, if everything settles down, okay, we have a lot of opportunity right across the border where you can basically get almost anything made. And even if you don't have 3D printing capabilities, there are a lot of people that, you can easily outsource that to get the things done. We have designers, great designers all around Hong Kong as well. I work with some of them. They're really good. Okay, so I would tend to think more than the challenges, there are opportunities that you really should take up at this point in time. I think you can do a lot for Hong Kong that way. There is not only that, there's funding as well. We have various platforms which are available for your products. But the important thing is, I think the challenge is getting that human perspective in so that you have these wow products. That, I think, is the key that you really need to focus on.
I remember, Professor, you talk about like, bring the wow aspect and also understanding like human design at the same time. And before I wrap up, actually, I can see there's one last question that suddenly pops up. Okay. And it's about like the business environment here. It's, what do you think the global relationship how would it affect the design business? What he or she means, it's the US is trying to decouple from China. And in such condition, how shall we deal with this new age in being a Hong Kong designer?
I think this is, again, comes back to innovation. What kind of innovation we can do here. I think Hong Kong can be a great place for innovation. Because as I said, there's a lot of opportunity working with China, okay, having all the designers here. And also, this can be really a hub for product development, which can, go into the US or any other market elsewhere. So again, I think, more than the challenge, I think I'd like to look at,
the positive
side. Yeah, always, that's the most important thing. If you want to do innovation, you want to do any product development, be positive, okay? There's always, there are always going to be bottlenecks. There are always going to be setbacks. It's a case of how you make them opportunities rather than look at them as negatives or challenges. That's what makes it different. And that's why people aren't doing a lot of this stuff, because it's not easy to do. So get on with it. And if you get it right, you can make it really big. And I think there are lots of them, that have happened in Hong Kong and gone across to China. I think most of these cases already.
Well, it's so good to know, I think everything, it's like a balance. There are definitely some ups and some downs. And it's so good that from Professor, we can see Professor things like the opportunities are actually much more than challenges we can see. And it's how we perceive the word IMPOSSIBLE. It's like, it's impossible, or it's I am possible. Well, but at this note, I think it's time for us to thank Professor for being here with us. Thank you so much, Professor.